I could feel the sweat under my dress. Not from nerves or excitement, but from something else. Something wasn't right. I hadn't even made it to the dance floor yet, but my gut was already screaming at me. The toasts had just started. The room was dimly lit with fairy lights and soft amber glows bouncing off wine glasses. Everyone looked so beautiful, so perfect. But when Jason's best man, Andrew, stood up to speak, there was this eerie pause, as if the universe itself took a breath and held it. Now, let me take you back a little. I had never been a fan of Andrew. He was the kind of man who never really grew up. He had that boys will be boys vibe that always rubbed me the wrong way. I'd catch him making jokes that barely tiptoed the line of decency, especially after a few drinks. But Jason insisted. He's like a brother to me, babe. He's just being funny. Except he wasn't funny. Not to me. Not ever. So there he was, in a cheap suit that probably cost less than the flowers on our table, holding his champagne glass like a mic. He cleared his throat dramatically, flashed Jason a smug smile, then looked directly at me, and I swear, there was something cruel dancing in his eyes. Now, I've known Jason since high school, he began, his voice too loud, too theatrical. And let me tell you, I never thought he'd settle down. Especially with someone like, well, he paused, scanning the crowd as people laughed politely. Let's just say, someone so determined. The room chuckled. I didn't. Jason shifted uncomfortably. I saw him glance at me, his eyes softening for a second, but he didn't say a word. I don't blame him entirely. People freeze. But I felt alone in that moment. Andrew went on, spewing jokes that weren't really jokes. Comments about my job, how I bossed Jason around, how I must have really wanted a ring to lock this one down. Then he said something that made the air around me grow thick. And let's be honest, when Jason told me he was proposing, I said, "Are you sure she's not marrying you just to finally have a wedding where she's the center of attention?" Some people laughed. Others didn't know how to react. I could feel the embarrassment creeping up my neck like a slow-moving fire. My maid of honor leaned over and whispered, "What the hell is he doing?" I smiled tightly, even as my heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to run out, scream, throw my bouquet at his smug face, but instead, I just watched. Because I already knew something Andrew didn't. This night would not end the way he thought it would. The applause was awkward when he finished. A few claps here and there. Jason hugged him quickly, like he wanted to get it over with. I don't even remember what the next speaker said. I was too busy thinking. Planning. See, what Andrew didn't know is that 3 weeks before the wedding, I found something. I wasn't snooping, it just sort of fell into my lap. An old text thread Jason had forgotten to delete from their shared group chat. One message stood out. It read, "Bro, can't believe you're actually marrying her. You sure this isn't just a long con for her to finally feel important?" Sent by Andrew. Jason had replied with just a laughing emoji. No words, just a laugh. At the time, I cried myself to sleep. I debated canceling the wedding, but something in me said, wait, watch. And now, watching Andrew try to publicly humiliate me, on my wedding day, no less, my tears dried up. My spine straightened. And I smiled. Because I had planned something very special for the reception. Something no one saw coming. When the speeches ended, I excused myself to the back room. My heart was still racing, but not from fear. No. This was the moment I had waited for. A friend of mine worked in event production and owed me a favor. She had helped me prepare something just in case, though I hoped I wouldn't need it. But now I absolutely needed it. I texted her one word. Now. The DJ's mic crackled. All right, folks, before we move on to the cake cutting, the bride has something special to share. Heads turned. Whispers fluttered. I walked up to the stage slowly, my heels tapping like little warning bells. I looked around the room, the guests, Jason, Andrew, and I smiled sweetly. Before I say anything, I began, I just want to thank everyone who made this day so beautiful. Really. It means everything to me. I turned my gaze toward Andrew. And, to those who use this day to make it about themselves, I have a little surprise. The lights dimmed. A projector flickered on behind me. And then the text appeared on the screen, larger than life. Bro, can't believe you're actually marrying her. You sure this isn't just a long con for her to finally feel important? Gasps filled the room. A few people turned in their chairs. Andrew's face went white. Jason's jaw dropped. Funny, right? I said, my voice calm, almost tender. Now everyone can laugh. The room was absolutely silent. You could hear the faint hum of the speakers, the breath people were holding in, the sound of someone's fork hitting a plate as they froze mid-bite. And Andrew? He was sinking in his seat like a deflated balloon, his confident smirk completely gone. Jason's face had gone pale too, not with anger, but with the realization of how far things had gone, and how little he had done to stop it. I continued, calmly, steadily, never raising my voice. See, weddings are supposed to be about love, about support, about celebrating a bond between two people. But unfortunately, tonight someone decided to make it about bitterness and a little jealousy, maybe? I turned away from the screen and looked directly at Andrew. So, I thought if you're going to show your true colors, then it's only fair I do the same. Gasps turned into murmurs. Some people had their hands over their mouths. Others just stared in complete disbelief. My bridesmaids were glued to the edge of their seats, some visibly shaking their heads, whispering to one another. Andrew stood up suddenly. Okay, this is being blown way out of proportion, he started, his voice shaky. It was a joke. That text, it was just a joke between guys. I turned the mic toward him. Oh, just a joke? Like your entire speech tonight. He froze. No answer. I shrugged and continued. See, I know some of you might think this is harsh, that I should have just let it go and smiled through it. But here's the thing, when someone tries to humiliate you publicly, the worst thing you can do is let them think they succeeded. I didn't have to say more. People were already piecing everything together. The mean-spirited jokes, the backhanded compliments, the audacity of trying to insult me on my own wedding day. I stepped away from the mic. Let's move on to the cake. I think we all deserve something sweet. The DJ hesitated, then nodded. Okay then, let's bring on the cake. As music started playing again and waiters brought out the cake, the atmosphere slowly began to shift. Conversations picked back up, but now they weren't about the flowers or the dinner. They were about what had just happened. And let me tell you, no one was talking about Andrew in a good way. Several guests came up to me, whispering support. One aunt squeezed my hand and said, "Good for you. That man's always been trouble." A college friend of Jason's actually apologized for laughing at Andrew's earlier jokes. I thought he was being playful, but now I see it. Even the venue manager whispered, "That's the boldest thing I've seen at a wedding, and I've seen a lot." Andrew didn't stick around long after that. He muttered something about needing air and slipped out the back, red-faced and humiliated. He didn't even stay for cake.
And Jason?
Jason didn't say a word for a while. He just looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. There was admiration in his eyes and guilt. Deep, quiet guilt. We had a moment later, just the two of us. He pulled me aside, away from the music and the chatter. "I didn't know you saw that text," he said quietly. I looked at him, my tone soft but firm. "I did. And I waited to see if you'd say anything about it. But you never did." He nodded slowly. "I thought it was just a dumb joke. I didn't realize how hurtful it was until now. Until I saw it all play out." I stared at him for a moment longer. "You know, I didn't do this to punish you. I did this because I needed someone to speak up for me, and if it had to be me, then so be it." Jason exhaled. Then he surprised me. He took my hand, kissed it gently, and said, "You were right. And I should have protected you. From now on, I will." Was it perfect?
No.
Was it sincere?
Yes.
We didn't dance our first dance right away. We talked, really talked, about boundaries, respect, and how blind loyalty to someone like Andrew had almost tainted what should have been a beautiful day. When we did finally hit the dance floor, I felt lighter. Not because the drama was over, but because I had stood up for myself in a way that left no room for question. I wasn't just the bride in a dress. I was a woman who knew her worth and demanded that everyone else see it too. And you know what? The music was sweeter after that. The cake tasted richer. The laughter felt more real. Not forced. Not hollow. People came up to me all night, strangers, distant relatives, even Jason's colleagues, and said things like, "I've never seen anyone handle something so gracefully. You just taught my daughter something she'll never forget." Damn, that was legendary. And I didn't need all that validation, but it felt good. It felt like a message to every person who's ever sat silently while someone else tried to belittle them. You don't have to scream. You don't have to cry. You just have to stand up, once boldly, and say, "No more." The wedding ended with warmth, unexpected smiles, and a kind of respect that can't be manufactured. Not because the flowers were perfect or the cake was flawless, but because the truth had been honored. The days that followed were revealing. Word spread fast. Not just among our friends and family, but somehow beyond that, acquaintances from college, people who didn't even attend the wedding, started reaching out. Some were curious. Some just wanted to say, "I heard what happened, and I think you were brave." But the most surprising reaction? Andrew's silence. Not a text. Not an apology. Nothing. It told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't embarrassed because he was sorry. He was embarrassed because he got caught. That's the thing about people like him. They're not really sorry for what they do, just sorry when it doesn't land the way they intended. When the crowd doesn't laugh. When the power they thought they had suddenly slips through their fingers. Jason, though, he changed. It didn't happen instantly, but it was there. A shift. He started checking in more, listening more carefully. Asking how I felt, not just about the wedding, but about everything. "I didn't realize how much I let him get away with," he said one night, weeks later, while we were curled up on the couch. Not just at the wedding. For years. I nodded slowly. Because it was easier. Because he never turned it on you. And that's how it goes, isn't it? People tolerate cruelty when it isn't aimed at them. They call it sarcasm, humor, just being real. But when it lands on someone they care about, when it lands on you, that's when it becomes real. Jason told me he'd been thinking a lot about his friendships, about loyalty, about what it meant to protect someone, not just in theory, but in action. He had always been kind to me, gentle, loving. But in that moment I realized he was growing. And I was too. Because that night didn't just expose Andrew. It exposed my own fear. My tendency to stay quiet, to be the bigger person, even when someone was treating me like I was small. And I wasn't small. None of us are. We shrink ourselves for other people's comfort. We laugh off things that hurt. We pretend we're fine just to keep the peace. But peace without truth is just silence. And silence can be a prison. So I chose freedom. I chose to speak up. And here's the thing, not everyone will like it. Not everyone will clap for you. Some will call you dramatic. Others will say you ruined the vibe, made a scene, went too far. But do you want to know what's worse than being called dramatic? Being disrespected over and over until you don't recognize yourself anymore. I wasn't going to let that be my story. You shouldn't either. Whether it's at a wedding, in a boardroom, at a dinner table, or in a quiet conversation with someone you love, you're allowed to speak up. You are allowed to say, "That's not okay." You are allowed to demand better. And the ones who truly love you, the ones who truly value you, they'll listen. They might not get it at first. They might resist. But if they're real, they'll listen. And they'll grow. That's what happened with Jason. He began setting boundaries with Andrew. At first, he was hesitant. "He's been my friend since we were kids," he said. "He was there when no one else was." And I understood that. I really did. But friendship, true friendship, isn't just about shared memories. It's about shared values. So when Andrew reached out months later, casually asking if we wanted to meet up for drinks, Jason replied, "Not until you apologize to my wife." Simple.
Clear.
Powerful. Andrew didn't respond. And maybe he never will. But that's not our problem anymore. Our story moved forward. We built a home full of honesty and laughter. Not the kind that comes at someone's expense, but the kind that lifts people up. And every once in a while, someone still brings up that wedding night. Some do it in hushed tones, like it's gossip. Others do it with wide eyes and admiration. But for me, it's not a scandal. It's not a moment I regret. It's the night I realized how powerful it is to stop smiling through disrespect, to take the mic, to own your voice, to remind everyone in the room, including yourself, exactly who you are. And if anyone still doubts, let them. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself, for your partner, for your future, is to say enough and mean it. I thought that was it, that I had made my point, that Andrew would fade into the background, one of those people you eventually forget, until someone says their name and a faint irritation resurfaces. But the universe had one last move to play. It happened 6 months later. Jason and I were out for brunch on a quiet Sunday morning. We were finally in that newlywed rhythm. Slow weekends, shared playlists, folded laundry, little inside jokes only we understood. Life had found a new peace. Until my phone buzzed. A message. No name. Just a number. And the words, "I think you should know what he's been saying about you." My stomach dropped. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I stared at the screen like it would change. Like the letters might rearrange themselves into something less invasive. Less cruel. But they didn't. I showed Jason. His face tightened instantly. I swear to God, if it's Andrew. We didn't finish brunch. The rest of the day blurred. A mix of speculation and silence. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to convince myself it was just some random troll or a prank. Until another message came through. This one with screenshots. Private messages from Andrew's group chat. Some names I didn't recognize. One I did, an old mutual friend from college. In those screenshots, Andrew was mocking me again. Calling me dramatic, saying I ruined the wedding, calling my speech a feminist meltdown. The part that hit hardest? Him joking that Jason was whipped now, like standing up for me somehow made him weak. Jason was livid. I was quiet. Because here's the thing, I didn't feel surprised. I felt tired. Exhausted by the predictability of men like Andrew. The way they double down when they feel threatened. The way they can't let go of control without trying to reframe your strength as hysteria.
But the twist?
The reason I'm telling you this? It's because someone in that very group chat, someone I never would have expected, chose to send those screenshots to me. They said they couldn't watch it anymore. That they had laughed along once. That they didn't like the version of themselves they became in that space. Your speech made me realize how messed up it all was, they wrote. And I figured you deserved to know what's still happening behind closed doors. That right there was the real last laugh. Not revenge. Not humiliation. Awareness. Someone had heard me. Someone had listened. Someone had changed. And that made all the pain worth it. Because sometimes, the loudest people aren't the most powerful. They just take up space until someone braver speaks. Andrew still hasn't apologized. He might never. People like him rarely do. They cling to pride like it's armor, unaware it's the very thing keeping them alone. Jason and I, on the other hand, were stronger than ever. Not because we've had it easy, but because we didn't run when it got hard. Because we didn't pretend the disrespect was harmless. Because we learned to have uncomfortable conversations and survive them. And me? I'm not the same woman I was on that wedding night. I'm sharper. Softer in some places, fiercer in others. I don't shrink anymore. I don't let other people narrate my story. You shouldn't either. Because there will always be people like Andrew, people who test your boundaries, make light of your truth, try to paint you as the problem when you demand respect. Let them talk. Let them underestimate you. Let them laugh. Just remember, the last laugh doesn't come from being the loudest. It comes from being the one who finally stood up and stayed standing. And if you ever find yourself in a moment like mine, staring down a room full of silence, wondering if you should speak, do it. Shake the room.
Take the mic.
Tell the truth. Not for revenge, but for yourself. Because healing doesn't always sound like soft music and meditative whispers. Sometimes it sounds like a clear voice in a crowded room saying, "That wasn't okay. And I won't pretend it was." And that's powerful.